They were coal-stained and broken, men buried alive by the very land they worked to feed their families. In 1921, 10,000 miners, veterans, immigrants, fathers, took up rifles and marched through the hills of West Virginia. They weren't fighting a foreign enemy. They were fighting for their freedom against corporations, armed sheriffs, and even the United States Army. It was the largest labor uprising in American history, and the biggest armed rebellion since the Civil War. This is the forgotten story of the Battle of Blair Mountain. The miners rise a war on American soil. In the heart of coal country, southern West Virginia in the early 1900s looked less like a state and more like a company-owned kingdom. Miners lived in homes they didn't own, shopped in stores they didn't control, and were paid in company scrip, a currency that was worthless outside the mine town. Conditions were brutal. Explosions, cave-ins, black lung, wages were low, hours long, safety regulations non-existent. Union organizers tried to help, but they were met with hired guns, private detectives, and armed deputies. The coal barons, men like Samuel Dixon and Fred Mooney, saw workers not as humans, but as replaceable parts. By 1920, tensions had boiled over. The United Mine Workers of America, UMWA, began organizing miners in Mingo and Logan counties. But they weren't just battling bosses. They were battling a private police state. In May 1920, the powder keg finally lit in a small town called Matewan, the Matewan Massacre. Bullets on Main Street, Matewan, West Virginia. May 19, 1920. The Baldwin Felts Detective Agency, the infamous private army hired by coal companies, arrived to evict miners' families. Armed with rifles and a list of names, they threw women and children into the street. But Matewan had a surprise waiting for them. Sid Hatfield, the town's police chief and a supporter of the Union. When the detectives tried to leave, Hatfield confronted them on the train platform. Words turned into shouts. Then shots rang out. 10 men were killed, including the mayor of Matewan and 7 Baldwin Felts agents. The Matewan Massacre made national headlines. Hatfield became a folk hero to miners, a lawman who had stood with the people. But the coal companies wanted revenge, and they'd get it. Just 1 year later, Sid Hatfield is murdered in the mountains ERUPT. On August 1, 1921, Sid Hatfield and his deputy Ed Chambers were walking up the courthouse steps in Welch, West Virginia, unarmed, smiling, their 2 faced charges from the Matewan shootout. Suddenly, Baldwin Felts agents gunned them down in cold blood. Dozens of shots. In broad daylight, in front of their wives, no arrests were made. Word spread like wildfire through the coal fields. Miners who had admired Hatfield saw it for what it was, a declaration of war. Within days, thousands of miners began organizing, not for a protest, but for a march to free imprisoned Union miners in Logan County, a march to take on Sheriff Don Chafin, the coal company's enforcer. A march to war. The march to Logan, 10,000 men, one mountain. 10,000 miners began to gather near Marmot, West Virginia. They carried rifles from the Great War, pistols tucked in belts, shotguns slung over backs. Some wore army uniforms, others came barefoot. Many carried lunch pails, ready to fight and feed on the move. Their goal, cross the rugged, forested terrain of Logan County and break the anti-Union blockade led by Sheriff Chafin. Chafin, bankrolled by coal companies, had fortified the ridges around Blair Mountain, the gateway into the county. Machine gun nests, trenches, barbed wire. He also had planes dropping homemade bombs on suspected Union positions. The miners pushed on anyway, crossing streams and climbing wooded hills, singing songs of labor and justice. This was not a strike, this was a rebellion. The Battle of Blair Mountain begins. Blood in the hills. August 25, 1921. The first shots echoed through the valleys of Blair Mountain. It was an all-out war. Miners attacked Chafin's positions head-on. They used trench tactics learned in France, dug in, returned fire. Coordinated movements with whistles and bugles. Chafin's men, a mix of deputies, scabs, and mercenaries, rained down bullets from hilltops. They had better positions, superior firepower, even aircraft. But the miners had numbers and fury. For days, gunfire lit up the hills. Forests caught fire. Women and children fled the valleys. Church bells rang as alarms. Some miners were captured. Some died, but more kept coming. By September 1st, thousands were within striking distance of Logan. The coal companies feared the worst, so they called Washington. The U.S. government intervenes, flags against rifles. President Warren G.I. Harding ordered the U.S. Army to intervene. On September 2, 1921, federal troops, fresh from World War I, arrived in West Virginia with machine guns, warplanes, and tanks. For the miners, this was a turning point. Many had served in the army. They saw the same uniforms they once wore now pointed at them. Rather than fight the U.S. military, the miners laid down their arms. The uprising was over. The government took the coal barons' side. No executives were punished, but over 500 miners were arrested, charged with treason, murder, and conspiracy. Trials in prison. Crushing the Union movement. The trials dragged on for months. The state made examples of Union leaders, even those who hadn't picked up a gun. Dozens were convicted. Hundreds were blacklisted. Union membership plummeted across southern West Virginia. The coal companies regained control. They reinstated company scrip, spies, blacklisting, evictions. The labor movement had lost its biggest battle, and Blair Mountain faded from memory, buried under fear and silence. Memory erased. The cover-up of a rebellion. For decades, the Battle of Blair Mountain was left out of textbooks. The battlefield was forgotten. Covered by trees, strip-mined, no monuments, no memorials. Local officials denied its significance. Some even claimed it never happened. But the truth lived on in the hills, whispered in union halls, sung in ballads, passed down in family stories. Then, in the early 2000s, archaeologists rediscovered shell casings, trench lines, and artifacts. Proof of the rebellion. The mountain had spoken. Legacy of the Coal Wars. The struggle continues. Blair Mountain stands today as a symbol of both hope and betrayal. The miners didn't win, but their fight laid the groundwork for the labor rights we take for granted. Today gives 40-hour work weeks, gives child labor laws, gives workplace safety. Their rebellion forced America to look in the mirror, to confront the cost of unchecked corporate power. And though the coal industry continues to fade, the battle cry still echoes. Which side are you on? The Battle of Blair Mountain wasn't just a labor strike. It was a war waged by forgotten men against the machine of greed, fought not for profit, but for dignity. They may have lost the mountain, but they gained something greater. They wrote their names into the hills of West Virginia, in blood, fire, and courage. And though history tried to erase them, they refused to be silenced.